We all know the Wagstaff of today, and many of us recall the years under Bill's leadership. But understanding the strong foundation and values on which the company stands requires a look into the hard-scrabble years following the Great Depression and the lives of George and Laura Wagstaff.
I started first grade in 1918, which also happened to be the year of the Great Flu epidemic. Because of that, school was only in session for 2 months that year, so we had to take the grade over. From there on, my schooling was interrupted a great many times. I managed to get through the 8th grade, but was never a good student. When I turned 17, I left our family home in Mount Pleasant, Utah to go to Salt Lake to work at the Utah Radio Company. It was here that I became very interested in machinery, lathes being especially fascinating. While I was away, our family home burned to the ground, and for the next year or so, I sent a large portion of my wages back home to help with the rebuilding of the house and to help support my older sister while she was away on her mission. For the next 6 years, I worked at the Utah Radio Company and the Utah Carburetor Company, until in 1931, I was called to be a Mormon missionary.
I was born in Logan, Utah in 1907 and grew up in a big, happy home with 9 siblings, of which I was right in the middle. My father was the 4th generation owner of a hardware store. He was my very favorite person. Father walked everywhere he went, and every day he walked home from the store for the noon meal. We children would wait and watch for him, then run to meet him and get a kiss.
As a missionary for the LDS Church, I was assigned to the Florida district. Having no automobile, none of us in the district did, we would go out to the highway and thumb rides, many times spending most of the day just getting a ride. That seemed such a waste of time that I determined to get us a car. After driving a pretty hard bargain, I became the proud owner of a 1928 Chevrolet Roadster for the pricely sum of $45. I was a bit nervous about the district president's reaction because I had heard he wasn't enthused about automobiles. Sure enough, a few weeks later I got a letter asking me to meet him in Jacksonville. Instead of a reprimand, however, he wanted to give me a tour of the Florida district. When I returned from my mission, jobs were scarce, and I bounced around between ranching and mining jobs until my father persuaded me to see if I could get into the Utah Agricultural College. I told him I didn't have a dime to go on, but he said if I'd go, he would give me a sack of potatoes or something to help me out. He didn't have much money either. I was accepted to the college and even provided a $30 reduction on my entrance fees. I borrowed an additional $30 from the First National Bank in Logan, with the college president co-signing the loan for me. I had to register as a special student, not having graduated from high school. I signed up for automobile mechanics, electricity, blacksmithing, machine shop, and business English. I had to drop the English course because of my lack of earlier schooling in that subject. In February 1935, I met my future wife, Laura Everton.
I was teaching the genealogical class at the 9th Ward LDS Church in Logan when I met George Wagstaff, who had recently been made the chairman of the genealogical committee. It only took a few dates before we decided to become engaged.
We were married 7 months later. We moved into Laura's family home while I finished up my schooling. I got a job at the Provo Foundry and Machine Company, partly because of my recent schooling and partly because I told them I had run an Acme turret lathe when I worked for the Utah Carburetor Company. Well, they put me on a Warner Sweezy turret lathe, the likes of which I had never seen, and I had big problems. I would wake up in the middle of the night with nightmares trying to run that machine. They cut my wages from 50 cents an hour to 40 cents an hour and told me I should really look for other work. Those early days of learning machine work were long, tedious, and tumultuous. Over the next 5 years, I held 6 different jobs in 4 different states until I finally secured work as a machinist in the sugar factory at Chinook, Montana.
Work was scarce in those days, and George looked far and wide to find employment. We traveled from Utah to Idaho to Oregon and back again until finally settling in Chinook, Montana, where George advanced to the position of assistant master mechanic over the next 7 years. When we arrived in Chinook, there was very little housing available, so we took a small cabin with no indoor plumbing. Several weeks later, we found a 2-room apartment in an old house. Then we moved again several weeks later into a duplex, until our crying baby kept the neighbors up all night. Finally, we found a house that would accommodate us and our growing family, but still ended up moving 2 more times during this period.
By 1944, people were beginning to leave the small towns and seek work in the war industries on the West Coast. We decided to follow suit, thinking Hanford would be the best place to go. But on a stopover in Spokane, I ended up getting a job at what is now Fairchild Air Force Base. It wasn't long before I was tired of commuting the 50 miles every day that the job required, and I started looking for something different. McIlvaney Machine Works in Yakima was advertising for a machinist with my qualifications, but we did not want to move to Yakima. McIlvaney needed a good machinist badly enough that he agreed to sell me a lathe I could set up in Spokane and machine castings before they were shipped to Yakima. The lathe was assembled from war surplus parts and a few more that I made. McIlvaney gave me a good buy on the lathe at $3,300, and I borrowed $800 from my father for the down payment. We set up the lathe in an old pump house on our property, and McIlvaney furnished me with the work needed to pay for the lathe. This was the humble beginning of Wagstaff Machine Works.
In 1946, after moving to Spokane, in addition to running our household with 5 children, I took on the task of doing the bookkeeping for our fledgling company, Wagstaff Machine Works. For the next 21 years, I reconciled the books and watched as the business grew and prospered. One of the great treasures of my life is the last letter I received from my father. In part, it reads, "I've been thinking of all the little lessons you had, the little jobs you did, the ideals that were planted, the good habits that were cultivated, the ambitions that were encouraged, of the kindness you've shown, the loving deeds you have done. You are just the kind of woman we would choose for a daughter, and your good qualities are carrying on into the next generation. With love, Father."
Hard work, perseverance, quality, and integrity. Core values of the Wagstaff founders, instilled in the succeeding generations, and embodied today in every member of the extended Wagstaff family.